running a hide-and-seek campaign and being disingenuous about his true agenda if reelected. Do you have any direct response to that? And more basically, are you running a risk here of some campaign fatigue if these two guys are going at one another by name so directly so many months before the election?
Well, I know you all know because you listened or to the speech or were there and watched it yourself. The president yesterday gave a comprehensive, detailed, dare I say, wonky exposition of his views of what our budget priorities ought to be and his views on why the Republican budget put forward by Chairman Ryan is not the right solution to our problems, why it's wrong for America. This was a policy speech that, again, had a great deal of detail attached to it as he explained why the Ryan Republican budget, if it were enacted into law, would be incredibly harmful to America's seniors, to the middle class, and to the absolute necessity of investing in areas like education, basic research, and infrastructure in order to ensure that America is strong economically in the 21st century. As he mentioned, and as one of the major points of the speech, is that this is not a theoretical exercise. Everyone in this room knows that the Ryan Republican budget would become the law of the land if someone else were to occupy the Oval Office next year and if Republicans continue to effectively control Congress. Because everyone supports this. It's not the sort of idea, the rump idea, the idea of a rump faction of the Republican Party. This is what now is mainstream Republican thinking, which is to, instead of taking a balanced approach to our budget deficit issues, a balanced approach to getting our fiscal house in order, we should give additional tax cuts to the wealthiest Americans, virtually the only segment of society that saw their economic lot improve in the first decade of this century. And to pay for those tax cuts, we should end Medicare as we know it. We should reduce by an average of 19% our non-defense discretionary budget. That means cut dramatically our investments in education, basic research, innovation, and the like. And the president simply believes that's the wrong approach. And this is not a theoretical exercise. This is real policy. And he went on to talk about a concrete vote the Senate will take in the next few weeks on the so-called Buffett rule. His principle, named after Warren Buffett, built around the idea that a billionaire should not pay a lower effective tax rate on his income than his secretary. So he certainly encourages the Senate to approve that.
So is that your direct response to the charge of a hide-and-seek campaign?
Well, look, the fact of the matter is the president was explicitly talking about a policy debate that we have been engaged in here in many ways for years and years, but intensively for the past year. This was a policy speech, I think, pretty explicitly delivered to an audience of your colleagues, editors, reporters, publishers.
One other quick one on a different subject. Do you have any response to the federal appeals court judge in Texas, Judge Smith, who criticized the president yesterday for his remarks about the Supreme Court and its power to overturn legislation and has asked for a letter from the Justice Department affirming the federal court's ability to do that?
Well, I think as the Attorney General has said, the Department of Justice will be responding to the request for a letter, and I would simply refer you to what the President said and what the Attorney General said, that of course the Supreme Court and our federal courts have as their responsibility the right to rule on the constitutionality of laws passed by Congress. The President made clear yesterday in answer to a question that is what he absolutely believes. What the President said both yesterday and the day before, what he did was make an unremarkable observation about 80 years of Supreme Court history. The fact that since the Lochner era of the court, since the 1930s, the Supreme Court has, without exception, deferred to Congress when it comes to Congress's authority to pass legislation to regulate matters of national economic importance, such as health care. 80 years plus. That is an observation and not a particularly remarkable one. It is a statement of fact. And he also expressed his faith that the Supreme Court would keep to that 85-year history of judicial precedent and uphold the constitutionality of the Affordable Care Act. Yes?
On a similar theme,
Sure.
some of the President's remarks about the healthcare case in the Supreme Court have been interpreted as challenging or putting pressure on the court ahead of the decision. Can you speak to that, and why not just allow the court to reach a decision and then
First of all, the President was asked a question and responded to it. Secondly, as I just said, he made an observation about why he believes that, well, first of all, that he believes the Affordable Care Act is constitutional, why he believes it's constitutional, and why he believes that the Supreme Court will, in keeping with 80-plus years of judicial precedent and Supreme Court precedent, will defer to Congress on its authority to pass legislation to regulate issues of national economic importance like our healthcare system. It's the reverse of intimidation. He's simply making an observation about precedent and the fact that he expects the court to adhere to that precedent. It's obviously, as he made clear yesterday, up to the court to make its determination, and we will wait and see what the court does. But I guess you could argue that circuit court judges who ruled on this were trying to intimidate or influence the court when they issued opinions, including very prominent conservative judges on the Court of Appeals, rather. When they issued an opinions that the Affordable Care Act is constitutional and that it is entirely constitutional in keeping with 80-plus years of judicial precedent.
Mm-hmm. The Pentagon said today that Khalid Sheikh Mohammed and 4 other accused people in 9/11 attacks will go to Guantanamo War Crimes Tribunal. Could you speak to that decision and why more time wasn't given to allow for a civilian court trial?
Well, it has been more than 10 years since 9/11. First of all, and the President is committed to ensuring that those who are accused of perpetrating the 9/11 attacks against the United States be brought to justice. The President remains committed to shutting down Guantanamo Bay. In that commitment, he is of the same opinion as his predecessor, as his opponent in the 2008 presidential election, as the senior leadership of the United States military, and many, many others who believe that Gitmo ought to be closed. There have obviously been obstacles in achieving that, but he remains committed to doing that. In the meantime, we have to ensure that Khalid Sheikh Mohammed and others who are accused of these heinous crimes are brought to justice, and this procedure is now underway to ensure that that happens.
Isn't it contradictory to be committed to closing Guantanamo Bay and also proceeding with something?
The fact of the matter is, in part because of the system and the situation that was put in place and the situation that existed under the prior administration, we have now, 11 years almost have passed since 9/11, or 10 and a half, and it is important to see that justice is done. The President's commitment to closing Guantanamo is as firm as ever. He agrees with our uniformed military leadership. He agrees with John McCain and George W. Bush that it ought to be closed. And we'll work to see that done. Unfortunately, as you know, we've encountered obstacles in getting that done from Congress, but he will continue to work to do that. Yes, Jessica.
Does the administration view the Fifth Circuit's request as intemperate?
I would refer you to the Justice Department. The Attorney General said that he would, or that the Department of Justice would respond appropriately.
You just suggested that in some ways it was an effort by them to intimidate.
No. Oh, I didn't at all. I certainly, if you interpreted what I said that way, you were mistaken. No, I was referring to a question about the President's remarks. The attorney representing the United States in that court said at the time that the administration, the President, the Attorney General believe, obviously, that the federal courts have their authority to rule on the constitutionality of laws passed by Congress. The President obviously believes that and said so again yesterday. That was my point. And I'm sure that that's what the response will make clear, that the Department of Justice provides.
Yesterday, the President clearly, for the first time in a campaign-themed speech, singled out Mitt Romney. He has said that he will not weigh in until there is a nominee. By doing so, does the White House, does the President feel that he now has his opponent in the general election?
I will go back to my first answer simply to make the point that the President gave a very detailed, fact-laden speech about budget policy yesterday. He made clear his opposition to the recently released new but not improved Ryan Republican budget and what his budget priorities are. It is also true, and this is part of the overall issue here, that this budget is supported not just by a small group of ideologues within the House of Representatives, but broadly by the Republicans in Congress and by virtually all of the contenders for president in the Republican Party. So this is a matter of, this is a real debate because the outcomes at the policy level are quite serious. It's not a theoretical debate. That's the point he was making. You can be sure that he won't choose as a venue to give a campaign speech, especially his first campaign speech or official campaign speech, an audience of editors, reporters, and publishers who are professionally obligated to sit on their hands.
Okay, it sounds pretty campaign themed to me.
I want to just take issue with how talking about the budget and how talking about it in terms that, I mean, there are themes in that speech and specifics in that speech that are directly pulled from speeches he's been giving for the past 3 years.
Okay, in any case, one last question. On February 8th, you were talking about the Stock Act and said that you were shocked to learn that elements of it had been pulled and watered down by Eric Cantor, from the House Republican Eric Cantor.
This is the Grassley amendment, yes.
Is the White House satisfied with the act as passed?
Well, the President signed it into law
Correct.
not too long ago.
Why is the White House now pleased with this bill when you weren't pleased?
It was improved by the Senate amendments that passed that gave greater protections to investors, and we will monitor the implementation of this law very closely to make sure that it is implemented in a way that's effective. But yes, the President supports it. The overall Stock Act represents some of the very key elements from the President's American Jobs Act speech back in September of 2011.
Would the White House prefer that there includes disclosure for financial advisors who...
Well, there's no question that we would, if we were issuing an executive order, there would be some things that might be different or improvements, but we definitely support the act, the bill. The President signed it into law. It represents some initiatives that he was the first to put forward as President last fall, so absolutely he supports it. Yes?
Part of Mitt Romney's response today to the President's comments yesterday, he said what the President was trying to do in his remarks was to deflect criticism from the fact that the debt has increased more under President Obama than all previous presidents combined. Is that incorrect, that statement about the size of the debt?
I'd have to look at his numbers. The fact is, as you know well, Nora, that a huge portion of the debt that the United States of America now carries on its books is attributable to the fact that, certainly the deficits that we've seen is attributable to the fact that in the previous administration, 2 massive tax cuts, 2 wars, and an unpaid for Medicare, expansion of Medicare through the prescription drug benefit, went on the books without, again, being paid for. we can get you the specific numbers, but it is a massive contribution to our federal deficit. And our debt. Another contributor to that was the fact that when the president took office, President Obama, we were in the midst of the worst financial and economic crisis in our lifetimes here, most of us, I think, since the 1930s. And that required a response in order to prevent a Great Recession from becoming a Great Depression. The response that the president took was effective in preventing a depression. The response the president and Congress took, and we have been and are now recovering from the worst financial crisis in 70-plus years. The fact of the matter is the president has embraced and has put forward a balanced approach to dealing with our deficits and our long-term debt. A balanced approach has been endorsed by every bipartisan commission that has looked at this, Democrats and Republicans. It has been supported by and endorsed by Democratic legislators in the Senate and the House. As of yet, it has not received support in any significant way or at any significant level by Republicans. This is the problem with the Republican budget the president talked about yesterday. We don't need to cut education and basic research and innovation and transportation by an average of 19%. In addition to the $1.2 trillion in cuts the president's already signed into law, bringing our non-defense discretionary spending to its lowest level since Dwight Eisenhower was president, the Ryan budget, the Republican budget, would go further than that by another 19%. Why? Not to reduce the deficit, but to give more tax cuts to millionaires and billionaires. That's a losing argument, and it's the wrong prescription for America's economy.
Given the president's detailed description about what's wrong with the Republican and the Ryan budget that's been endorsed by Mitt Romney, why then doesn't the president want to offer people a different choice? Why doesn't he have his own party put forward a budget in Congress?
Nora, you know that the president has put forward a budget. You know that. Well, I had this discussion yesterday in an interview that I did. What everyone knows is that in a situation where Washington is divided, the only way to get to a budget agreement that represents a compromise that can be passed into law and signed by the president is that if it enjoys bipartisan support. Passing a bill with only Republican support in the House and passing a bill in the House that garners only Republican support and passing a bill in the Senate that garners only Democratic support does not achieve that and does not bring you any closer to a resolution. What you need, I can see you getting all worked up over here, but what you need is a balanced approach that has been supported by bipartisan commissions. That is, I mean, again, there's a lot of talk about the Simpson-Bowles Commission, which, as the president noted yesterday, he created and had to create through his executive authority because Republicans, the president endorses the approach that the Simpson-Bowles Commission took, and in fact his budget proposal is different from the Simpson-Bowles approach. How? It doesn't raise as much revenue, which you would think would appeal to Republicans, and it doesn't cut defense spending by as much, which you would think would appeal to Republicans. And yet, the 3 House Republican members on the Simpson-Bowles Commission voted no, including Representative Ryan. So what does that tell you about how they view the need for a balanced approach? Throughout this debate in the past year, you have seen Democrats, led by the president, do really hard things. Democrats aren't supposed to like cuts in discretionary spending, basically domestic programs. And yet this president has signed into law the deepest discretionary spending cuts in recent memory that have brought our discretionary spending levels to their lowest level since Dwight Eisenhower was president. The Democrats generally do not like and do not support cuts in entitlement programs, and yet this president put forward difficult reforms in our entitlement programs because he believes that you have to have a balanced approach. You have to include entitlement reform in any effort to reduce our deficit and bring down reduce our debt. And the president also believes you have to include revenue, as does the vast majority of the American people. So who hasn't moved here? Where's the Republican proposal that includes revenue as an element of a balanced approach? It's certainly not the Republican budget.
And I'll let Ed follow on that in a minute. But on the Supreme Court, just one more question on the Supreme Court and the president's comments Monday. Does he regret using the word unprecedented?
Not at all, because as I've said a couple of times now, the president was referring to making the unremarkable observation about 80 years of Supreme Court history. Since the Lochner era, well, only because a handful of people didn't seem to understand what he was referring to. Of course, he was referring to the fact that it would be unprecedented in the modern era of the Supreme Court, since the New Deal era, for the Supreme Court to overturn legislation passed by Congress designed to regulate and deal with a matter of national economic importance like our healthcare system. That is a fact. Since the Lochner era, which ended when the court began to defer to Congress on New Deal legislation, the Supreme Court has not done that, has not broken the precedent set there, and that's a number of years now. That's what would be unprecedented about it. He did not suggest, did not mean and did not suggest that the court, it would be unprecedented for the court to rule that a law was unconstitutional. That's what the Supreme Court is there to do. But it has, under the Commerce Clause, deferred to Congress's authority in matters of national economic importance.
But on that point, Republicans are
Ed.
mentioning. Thank you, Jay. The risk of being intemperate. I just wanted to ask.
Never.
80 years of precedent you keep talking about, but Republicans are pointing to, I think it's 159 different times in the history of America where the Supreme Court has decided that something is not unconstitutional. Obviously not all of those times involving the Commerce Clause, which is the caveat.
Well, none of them in the last 85 years, and that's what the president was talking about.
But there's 159 times the court
if they
has
are
said
citing,
it's unconstitutional.
if they are citing times when the court ruled as unconstitutional something under the Commerce Clause that Congress did, they're basically saying they shouldn't have passed some of the New Deal legislation, and perhaps they want to revisit that. But the precedent we're talking about here, as I've made clear, I mean, you can say that they make this argument about precedent based on something the president didn't say or mean, or we can talk about...
But to be clear, he didn't specify what you're specifying now.
He did yesterday.
Yesterday. But in his original comments, he did not
but-
draw out that caveat. He just said the whole thing would be unprecedented.
That's not what he said, Ed. That's not certainly what he meant. And it was clear to most folks who observe this and understand what is at issue here.
Jay, that's not true. The president said on Monday that it would be an unprecedented, extraordinary step of overturning a law that was passed by a strong majority of a Democratic elected Congress. It took him yesterday to talk about the Commerce Clause and on an economic issue.
Nora,
There are two instances in the past 80 years where the Supreme Court has overturned stuff. U.S. versus Lopez and U.S. versus
Nora, what I'm telling you
These
and
are
what...
very specific legal issues. It's not evident to everybody.
Well, it may not be evident to you. It is clear that the president was talking about matters like this that involve the Commerce Clause, that involve Congress passing legislation to deal with issues of national economic importance. National economic matters like health insurance, which is clearly a national economic issue. That's what he was referring to. And you know, again, he spoke to this yesterday. It is obvious and clear, and nobody would ever contend in his office, and he certainly was not contending, that the Supreme Court doesn't have, as its right and responsibility, the ability to overturn laws passed by Congress as unconstitutional. He was referring to 85 years of judicial precedent, of Supreme Court precedent, with regard to matters like the one under consideration. And it's maybe fun to pretend he meant otherwise, but everyone here knows that that's what he meant. Ed.
But to quote what Nora just quoted, back to Nora.
For the sake of argument, we're going to pretend he didn't mean that.
No, okay, but
He had to clarify.
I'm telling
He
you-
did clarify the next day.
and also when you said, well, to Nora or me,
I'm not
that maybe
disagreeing.
we didn't know those cases. Do you think most average Americans know about a Supreme Court case from 75 years ago? Come on, I mean, most
But
people are
what's your
not
point, Ed? Are
legal
you
experts.
suggesting, I just want to know, are you suggesting
Because the
that he...
president left the impression that the whole thing would be unprecedented.
And I'm
He did
telling
not
you,
have a
and he
caveat.
told you, and others like me have said, actually on the day of as well as after, that what he meant, and what he made clear yesterday, and he was a law professor,
Right.
and he understands constitutional law and constitutional precedent and the role of the Supreme Court,
Okay.
was a reference to the Supreme Court's history in its rulings on matters under the Commerce Clause.
On what Nora quoted about the president saying Monday, a strong majority of the democratically elected Congress. As you know, the House passed the health care bill 219 to 212. In the
Here we
Senate,
go.
well, it's
Yeah,
a
go
fact.
ahead.
I know, here we go. But here we go with a fact. Imagine that. It was not a strong majority. I mean, the Republicans just pushed through the Ryan budget with Republican votes. You guys would not call that a strong majority, would you?
No, but here's the environment that we live in, Ed. In order for a budget agreement to become law, right? The Republicans don't control both the executive branch and the legislative branch, and the Democrats don't control both. In order for the absolute necessity of dealing with our deficit and debt challenges, we need a bipartisan compromise. The only path, as evident to anyone who thinks about this matter, the only path to that is a balanced approach. Republicans in the House know that. Democrats in the Senate know that. The president knows that. That's why he has embraced a balanced approach. But what the Republicans haven't...
219 to 212. So that's a strong majority, you're saying, factually?
You're talking about apples and oranges here.
No, we're talking
That
apples on healthcare.
passed...
Healthcare. 219 to
that
212.
passed...
That is a strong majority, factually?
Ed, that passed Congress and was signed into law. You know that there is no way to... I mean, look, you're making the president's point. You know that there is no way to achieve a balanced approach, to achieve a significant compromise on deficit and debt reduction through in a budget compromise without a balanced approach. You know that. That's not going to happen right now, right? Without
We're talking about health care. We can go back to those.
Okay. Right? You're absolutely correct if, as some hope happens, someone else occupies the Oval Office next year and Republicans control Congress, that the Ryan Republican budget could well become law. That's exactly what the president was talking about yesterday. This is not a theoretical debate. What will become law, because this is not, you know, the conservative fringe of a Republican Party now talking, it is the entire party, is a bill, is a budget that would decimate discretionary spending on education and innovation and research and development, would end Medicare as we know it. I keep getting, you know, throwbacks to the 1990s. End Medicare as we know it by creating a voucher system for Medicare, where and a two-tiered system where you know, healthy people go to the cheaper private insurance options, and then Medicare is populated only by the older and sicker members of our senior population, driving up costs, costs that will be shifted to seniors. And that's simply not fair. That's not what the president believes is right.
It was for Monday. I know we're talking as well about the budget, but just to be clear on health care, the president, when he defended what he was saying on the Supreme Court Monday on health care, was saying that a strong majority passed this in both chambers of Congress. Health care, not the budget, but health care. Is that 219 votes is a strong majority?
Well, a majority passed. And look, it was the point the president was making. Is that under the past 80 years of Supreme Court history, the Supreme Court has shown deference to the legislature to deal with matters under the Commerce Clause of national economic importance, like health care. And he is confident that both the Affordable Care Act, under the 80-plus years of precedent, is constitutional, and that the Supreme Court will agree with them, as did lower courts in opinions put forward by very prominent conservative judges.
Last thing, when Jessica and Ann were asking you about the budget, back on the budget, you kept saying it was a policy speech and that it was wonky, and there were wonky elements to it, no doubt, because he was talking about facts. However, he also called it laughable, the budget. He said it was a Trojan horse, social Darwinism. How can you suggest that he wasn't playing politics as well? We get that he was talking about substance too, but he was playing politics yesterday. He called it a Trojan horse.
Could have and did, in many ways, give the same speech last year at this time. And you know, he gave a speech in response to the original Ryan budget that was very clear about why he felt that it was not the right answer to our challenges economically. And there really is no difference between that and this, except that we now know that all of the would-be leaders of the Republican Party, virtually, those who would be president, support the Ryan Republican budget and think it's the right way to go. The president disagrees. Yes. And then I'm going to move around. Sorry for the front row.
Does he regret the unelected? Does he the issue that the judge seems to have is this issue of the unelected jab that the president used on Monday, referring to the judiciary using what was clearly a sort of hot political rhetoric in reference to the judiciary when you refer to them as an unelected body. That's something that's a sort of tried and true political attack on the judiciary that we've seen for years. Does the president regret
Well,
that? I mean, is that why he seemed to walk things back a little bit yesterday?
He, as has been demonstrated here, I guess other folks didn't know we were talking about a piece of legislation that would be ruled on under the Commerce Clause, and that's what he was referring to. So I accept that some of the expansion that the president offered and I and others offered might have helped people understand exactly what he was talking about and referring to. But I think his point about Congress was simply that the Supreme Court, since the New Deal, has deferred to the legislature, those who are elected by people around the country, to write laws for them, and in this matter, on matters of national economic importance, to pass laws that regulate the economy and regulate areas of the economy like our healthcare market. So that is the point he was making, is that the court, as a matter of precedent, has deferred on matters like this to the.
A bunch of unelected. He goes, I would remind them that they're unelected. I mean, that's been the way the judiciary was set up from the very beginning.
He was making an unremarkable observation about.
Is that an unremarkable thing? To use a political
Well, they aren't elected. It's, again, a statement of fact. Just like, members of Congress aren't judges. Well, some of them may have been, but they're not largely judges. So, and they are elected. The point of the matter is as a matter of Supreme Court precedent, Supreme Court has deferred to the legislature in matters dealing with the national economy.
So should we interpret his remarks yesterday as a walk back of sorts from the tougher rhetoric on Monday?
No, it was. He was asked again, and he offered more expansive comments on it. Again, I take the point here. I guess some folks didn't know that we were talking about the Commerce Clause, and that's what he referred to. I accept that, and hope now it is clear, as again would be evident to anyone, since he's a constitutional law professor as well as the President of the United States, that he believes the Supreme Court can and has and should rule on the constitutionality of laws passed by Congress.
Two things I want to follow up on the answers that you gave. You referred just now about, when you were talking about the budget, first, isn't there you say that the only way, that there's no other way to get a budget done, one passes the House with just Republican votes. Isn't there a way, the House and Senate work this way all the time. The Senate passes a bill, the House passes a bill, and then they try to merge them together. What's wrong with trying to do that?
Well, look, it is always our preference for Congress to work efficiently and effectively, and that would certainly be a good thing. But we have seen, in the past year plus, of very intense negotiations between the Senate and the House, between Republicans and Democrats, between leaders in Congress and the White House, that the only way to accomplish, in an environment like this, significant compromise that can be passed out of this Congress and signed into law by the President, is to take an approach that is balanced. And that's how we averted a government shutdown last spring, and that's how we, in the summer, late summer, while failing to get the comprehensive balanced approach that is required to deal with our long-term deficits and debt, we were able to pass into law the Budget Control Act, which, by the way, which is, again, designed by Congress, voted on by Congress, passed by Congress, and now Republicans in Congress want to violate that agreement through the Ryan budget.
Is the conference committee approach being used? That
No,
if Democrats passed a budget?
But Chuck, all I'm saying is that it's real. We would not object to that, but what I'm saying is it's not, given what we have seen over the past 11 months, the way that we have come closest to achieving bipartisan compromises through the kinds of negotiations that we had to go through last year.
And you said in response,
and unfortunately, the point is that what the President has put forward, what Democrats have agreed to in these negotiations, represents a significant compromise by the President and Democrats on issues that are sacred cows, if you will, to the Democratic Party. What we have not seen,
Have you put on a plan on Social Security reform?
No, the President has made clear his position on Social Security reform. He's made it clear in his State of the Union address. He made it clear again when he put out his budget proposal in the fall. And I would note that the Ryan budget contains no Social Security reform.
So when you say entitlement reform, you're saying you're excluding Social Security. You're only talking about Medicare.
I'm not saying that
Medicaid.
we don't need to deal in the long term with our Social Security matters. I'm talking about Medicare, Medicaid, and other mandatories. But the fact of the matter is, as you know, you reported on it, the president led his party to agree to significant reforms in our entitlements, our health care entitlements, as part of what could have been a bipartisan grand bargain. And that was not achieved because Republicans would not go along with the idea that it had to be balanced. It had to include, it is funny to hear Republicans talk about how there is no plan and then describe it in detail, but that's another matter.
Neither side released their final plans publicly.
It was
so
part
we
of a
don't-
negotiating process that you know well was the only way to potentially achieve this, what would have been a very difficult compromise. Separately, as you guys know, and I know from your reporting, in the on the super committee that dealt with the, as a result of the Budget Control Act, Democrats went extremely far in making significant compromises on issues like entitlements. And the whole thing broke down. Why? Because Republicans refused to include revenues as part of an overall a process. And that's the only way to do it. Everybody knows that. April.
Gallup poll has come out with the new job approval rating for President Obama. 48% approve and 45% disapprove. What are your comments?
I mean, there are polls every day. I don't really have a comment.
It's not moving.
Is that your? That's your comment. I mean, look, the president's focused on the job he needs to do as president, and he is focused especially on the need to take every action he can, working with Congress or through his executive authority, to continue to help this economy to grow and recover, to continue to see job creation, and to continue to ensure the security of the American people, both home and abroad. Those are his focuses as president at this time. At the campaign and polls, there's plenty of time for that. And that's a long time. That is a long time. And, as I've said for a long time now, as this year progresses, the president will, of course, by necessity, be more engaged in the campaign. At this point, we still do not have a Republican nominee. And, that time will come, and you will see him engage when it's appropriate.
The hoodie movement has made its way to the White House. AME Bishop John R. Bryant came to the prayer breakfast this morning with a hoodie on in response to the Trayvon